Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and today we're continuing the reign of Cao Rui Let's Talk Lore series with episode 7, titled Personal Problems. Now last episode, we finished covering Cao Rui's life in terms of his accomplishments as emperor, but aside from the matters of state, Cao Rui's personal life also played a critical role in the history of Wei. So for this episode, we're going to shift away from the battles and politics and instead focus on the smaller things, such as love. So previously we mentioned that when Cao Rui first came of age, his father Cao Pi found him a wife in Lady Yu, who hailed from a powerful gentry clan in the Henei commandery. But at the same time, Cao Rui took a concubine in Lady Mao, who also hailed from Henei, which I think meant that she was most likely Lady Yu's personal maid, as it was customary for personal maids to become concubines for their lady's husband. On top of that, we do know that Lady Mao's father was a stable hand in charge of taking care of the horses and carriages, which probably meant that her entire family worked under the Yu clan as servants. But despite this, after their marriage to Cao Rui, it was Lady Mao and not Lady Yu that won Cao Rui's heart, as it was recorded that Cao Rui was enamored with Lady Mao, and the two of them were inseparable. This obviously would become a problem once Cao Rui becomes the emperor, as very much like his own father Cao Pi, Cao Rui wanted to name his beloved concubine Lady Mao as the empress, instead of his main wife Lady Yu. So using the same playbook that his father had used against his own birth mother, Cao Rui decided to delay the announcement of empress after his coronation in 226. And since they were levels to concubine ranks, he also ended up elevating Lady Mao to the highest rank of Guipin, as it became clear that he intended to name her as empress rather than his wife, Lady Yu. This was particularly devastating for Lady Yu, as Lady Mao was her former maid. So in an effort to comfort her, Cao Rui's grandmother, Lady Bian, who was still alive at this time, decided to visit her granddaughter-in-law, trying to make her feel better. Yet Lady Yu, who was raised by an influential regional gentry clan, just could not accept this reality, as she cursed at Lady Bian by saying that the Cao clan have a terrible habit of naming low-class empresses, and that this was going to be the end of Wei. This was clearly a jab at Lady Bian as well, since Lady Bian was a traveling dancer who became Cao Cao's concubine before becoming Empress Dowager after Cao Pi's usurpation. And when Cao Rui had heard about this interaction, it became the perfect reason for him to divorce Lady Yu, as she would be casted away in exile to a palace in Ye, where she will live out the rest of her life under house arrest. Then in November of 227, a year after his coronation, Lady Mao would officially become Cao Rui's first empress. Now, one interesting side note is that Lady Mao's father, Mao Jia, who was an uneducated stable hand, suddenly became the emperor's father-in-law, as Cao Rui would award him a second marquis title and a court position. Naturally, in celebration of his meteoric rise, Mao Jia ended up hosting a feast in his new estate for his fellow court officials, where he kept referring to himself as Marquis, which soon became the joke of the town as he ended up using the wrong term due to his lack of education. But of course, no one was dumb enough to tell the emperor's father-in-law that he had made a mistake. Yet Empress Mao's story with Cao Rui would not have a happy ending either. But to tell this story, we need to first discuss Cao Rui's sons. Now, prior to Cao Rui's coronation, he already had his first son in Cao Jiong with an unnamed concubine. But just 3 months into his reign, in August of 226, Cao Jiong would die of illness before reaching the age of 3. Cao Rui would go on to have a second son in Cao Mu with another unnamed concubine, but Cao Mu would also not survive his infancy, as he too would die in 229. Then finally in 231, Cao Rui would have his third son in Cao Yin, whose mother is actually Empress Mao. And given how he had lost two sons before, and how this son was also the son of the empress, many at court thought Cao Yin was going to become the crown prince without a doubt. Cao Rui's uncle, Cao Zhi, even wrote a poem to celebrate the birth of Cao Yin, but unfortunately, just 10 months later, Cao Yin would also pass away before even reaching his first birthday. Cao Yin's death would also become a pain point between Cao Rui and Empress Mao, as Cao Rui started to favor another concubine in Lady Guo instead. Now, Lady Guo's past is also quite interesting because she comes from a relatively influential gentry clan on the western frontier commandery of Xiping, but during Cao Pi's reign, the Xiping commandery saw a rebellion that resulted in a military crackdown by Wei. And in the aftermath of that rebellion, Lady Guo's clan was imprisoned, where many of the male members were sentenced to become laborers, while the females were sent to the imperial palace to become maids. And it was here that Lady Guo had caught Cao Rui's eyes and ended up becoming a concubine. Now this will become a reoccurring theme for Cao Rui, as he had the eyes for the ladies. And throughout his entire reign, Cao Rui was said to have collected around 10,000 concubines. And what was particularly bad about his concubine collection was that many of his concubines were the daughters of Tuntian farmers, and according to Wei law, daughters of Tuntian farmers were supposed to marry soldiers, as the Tuntian farm system was a mechanism designed to provide Wei with manpower and food for war. So the sons and fathers of the Tuntian farms would often be conscripted as soldiers, while the daughters became wives to continue the Tuntian system for generations. But Cao Rui would hand select the most beautiful daughters and made them into his concubine instead, which not only broke the law but also hurt the morale of the Wei army, as it was seen as a slap across the face for those who had served Wei diligently. Things worsened after 234, as with Zhuge Liang's death and Sun Quan's latest failures at Hefei, external pressure lifted, and Cao Rui started to shift the wealth of Wei into palace constructions, as he needed more space to house his many concubines. And not only did palace construction cost money, they also required a massive amount of laborers, which were conscripted from the farms. Thus, the Wei economy was hurt twice, as time taken away from the field also meant less harvest. Now, while Cao Rui was doing all this, many in the Wei court, including some of his former tutors, filed their complaints to the emperor, warning him that his actions were hurting the country. And while Cao Rui would always read these complaints and also never punish those who had filed them, he also never listened, as he simply continued doing what he wanted. And once his palace renovation were completed, he had 8 housing complexes on the north side of the palace, where he kept his thousands of concubines. And in his later years, he simply moved into this space where he had hand-selected a few concubines that knew how to read to act as his officials, as imperial court documents were all moved here, so that Cao Rui could work surrounded by his concubines. Empress Mao obviously was not happy with this development, as she kept her eyes on the emperor's activities, which Cao Rui ended up framing as spying, and he used this in 237 to sentence her to death. Now, despite having so many concubines, Cao Rui would have no more sons, so he resorted to adoption, as sons from other Cao clan members of suitable age were selected to become Cao Rui's sons in order to ensure that someone could inherit the throne. To this end, Cao Xun and Cao Feng were selected. Now, Cao Xun's birth father was never recorded, as he would die not long after, but we do know that Cao Feng was the son of Cao Kai, who was the son of Cao Zhang. For those who don't remember, Cao Zhang was Lady Bian's second son, and the younger brother of Cao Pi, which makes him Cao Rui's uncle. So Cao Feng was basically Cao Rui's nephew, but because of Cao Rui's need for an heir, Cao Feng would end up being adopted by Cao Rui at just 3 years old in 235. And as an interesting side note, Cao Feng's grandmother was Sun Ben's daughter. Now, Sun Ben is Sun Ce's cousin, and someone who had fought under Sun Jian way back. And when Sun Ce first left Yuan Shu and became an ally of Cao Cao against Yuan Shu, a political marriage between the two clans were set up, where Cao Cao's son, Cao Zhang, ended up marrying Sun Ben's daughter, Lady Sun. So interestingly enough, Cao Fang, who would go on to become the third emperor of Wei, is actually related to Sun Quan, as his grandmother is also Sun Quan's niece. And with that, our episode here will come to an end, as Cao Rui's excessive personal life and his string of bad luck with his sons will cost Wei heavily, as we'll return tomorrow to wrap up the series by talking about Cao Rui's legacy at court and his choice of regents upon his death. So as always, hopefully you all have enjoyed this episode enough to hit that like button to help support the channel, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!